Cyber Threat Brief for May 31st, 2026. Palo Alto Global Protect VPN suffers active exploitation of an authentication bypass, CVE 2026-0257. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, KEV, Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, due June 1. New Linux privilege escalation flaw dubbed CIF switch grants root on multiple distributions. Flowise AI platform ships a critical remote code execution vulnerability, CVE 2026-40933, with public exploit code. Here's the full breakdown of today's top security stories. Daily Security Brief, 2026-0531. Next section, Critical Alerts. Palo Alto Global Protect VPN Authentication Bypass, CVE 2026-0257. Palo Alto Networks confirmed active exploitation of CVE 2026-0257, an authentication bypass in Global Protect VPN that allows attackers to establish unauthorized VPN connections using forged authentication override cookies. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, added this flaw to the KEV, Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog with a June 1, 2026 remediation deadline. EPSS, the Exploit Prediction Scoring System, score is 0. 415, 97th percentile. Rapid7 observed exploitation across numerous customers beginning May 17, with attacks originating from Vultr and Dramatic Systems infrastructure. The flaw affects devices with authentication override cookies enabled and a specific certificate configuration where the same certificate is used for both HTTPS services and authentication override cookies. Attackers retrieve the public certificate via HTTPS, then forge authentication override cookies for arbitrary users. The vulnerability stems from PANOS validating authentication override cookies by decrypting them with a private key but not performing signature verification. Action: install security updates immediately. Mitigation options include disabling the authentication override feature or using a dedicated certificate for this feature that is not shared with other services. Federal agencies must remediate by June 1, 2026. Sources: Bleeping Computer. CIF switch Linux privilege escalation, a local privilege escalation vulnerability dubbed CIF switch in the Linux kernel, allows attackers to forge CIFS authentication key descriptions, abuse the kernel's key request mechanism, and gain root privileges. The flaw impacts multiple distributions, shipping vulnerable combinations of the kernel CIFS module and CIFS utils, version 6. 14 and higher, with some older variants also affected. The vulnerability was introduced 19 years ago in 2007. Confirmed vulnerable distributions include Linux Mint 21, 3/22, 3, CentOS Stream 9, Rocky Linux 9, Alma Linux 9, Kali Linux 2021, for 2026, 1, and SLES 15 SB7. Ubuntu, Debian, Pop! OS, OpenSUSE, Oracle Linux, and Amazon Linux may be vulnerable if CIFS utils is installed. Some distributions like Ubuntu 26, 4, Fedora 4044, CentOS Stream 10, and Alma Linux 10 have default SE Linux/App Armor settings that prevent exploitation. The flaw allows an unprivileged user to create a forged CIFS. SBNeGo request that triggers the normal authentication workflow, causing the root privileged CIFS. Upcall helper to trust attacker-controlled fields. Attackers can force a namespace switch and trigger a name service switch lookup before privileges are dropped, loading a malicious NSS module and achieving root code execution. Action: install kernel patch, upstream commit 3.1 FDF, or disable/blacklist the CIFS module if unused, remove CIFS utils package if unnecessary, and disable unprivileged user namespaces. A proof of concept exploit is publicly available. Sources: Bleeping Computer. Flowise AI platform remote code execution, CVE 2026-40933. Flowise, an open-source LLM flow builder with over 52,000 GitHub stars, contains a critical remote code execution vulnerability, CVE 2026-40933. CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, 9.9. With public proof of concept exploit code, EPSS score is 0. 1, 22nd percentile. The flaw stems from unsafe serialization of stdio commands in the MCP adapter. Flowise before version 3.1.0 allowed any user to add a new MCP and supply arbitrary commands, enabling code execution on the underlying OS. An attacker can include a malicious command in a custom MCP tool configuration, export the chat flow as JSON, and share it with a victim. The payload executes during the import process when the canvas loads the available actions dropdown, which triggers enumeration of the MCP server's tools. Successful exploitation leads to OS-level execution with the Flowise process's privileges, often root in containerized deployments, exposing all credentials stored in the platform and all connected services. Action: upgrade to Flowise version 3.1.0 or later. Flowise Cloud is not affected because it has STDO MCP disabled. Self-hosted instances are vulnerable by default. Sources: Security Week. Next section: Business and Infrastructure Threats. Russian intelligence technology procurement escalation. European intelligence officials report that Russia's intelligence agencies have grown more aggressive in efforts to steal Western technology and defense secrets as sanctions squeeze the country's wartime economy. Moscow is building fake companies, recruiting middlemen, and deploying cyber spies and hackers. Russia is targeting advanced machine tools, factory equipment, research, dual-use technology, defense industry secrets, high-end research on advanced weaponry, such as Sweden's Gripen fighter jet, camera and laser technology that could be integrated into weapons systems, space technology, quantum technology, Arctic technology, marine technology, sanctioned computer technology, and software updates for machine tools. About a third of Russia's GDP currently goes to the war effort. Intelligence officials note Russia is deploying cyber attacks against European firms and critical infrastructure to gather information for potential exploitation. Sweden experienced an attack on a power plant last year where Russia-linked actors attempted to destroy the plant but were detected and blocked. Officials note Russia is taking greater risks and caring less about potential attribution after their activities. Action: companies handling advanced technology, defense research, or dual-use equipment should review supply chain security, endpoint detection capabilities, and insider threat programs. Russia is using front companies and middlemen to bypass sanctions. Sources: Security Week. Next section: Patch Priority. Palo Alto Global Protect, CVE 2026-0257, actively exploited, CISAKEV due June 1. Flowise, CVE 2026-40933, CVSS 9.9 RCE, public exploit available. Linux kernel CIFS module, CIF switch privilege escalation, multiple distributions affected. GNU TLS, certificate validation bypass flaws, CVE 2026-42012, and 3 additional CVEs. See show notes for the full list. Next section: Vulnerability Disclosures. GNU TLS Certificate Validation Bypass Flaws Microsoft Security Update Guide, published 4 GNU TLS vulnerabilities. CVE 2026-42012, EPSS 0.0, 9th percentile, is a certificate validation bypass due to improper handling of URI and SRV-SAN. EPSS 0.0, 10th percentile, is a certificate validation bypass due to oversized subject alternative names. EPSS 0.1, 34th percentile, is information disclosure via heap overread in RSA key exchange. EPSS 0.1, 34th percentile, is memory corruption due to off-by-1 error in PKCS #12 bag handling, and 3 additional CVEs. See show notes for the full list. Sources: MSRC, 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 and 3 additional CVEs. See show notes for the full list. Additional certificate validation flaws: CVE 2026-42790. EPSS 0.0, 9th percentile, is a name constraints DNS bypass via subject common name fallback in public key hostname verification. CVE 2026-42789, EPSS 0.0, 9th percentile, allows non-CA certificates to be accepted as intermediate issuers in public key path validation. Sources: MSRC, MSRC. KubeVirt security flaws: CVE 2026-7374. EPSS 0.1, 29th percentile, is a privilege escalation and node compromise via symlink following vulnerability in KubeVirt virt handler. CVE 2026-9804. EPSS 0.0, 8th percentile, is a Veeam export directory symlink escape that enables exporter pod file read. Sources: MSRC, MSRC. Node JS permission model flaws: CVE 2024-36137. EPSS 0.1, 27th percentile, affects Node JS experimental permission model when the allowfswrite flag is used. Operations such as fs, fchown, or fs. fchmod can use a read-only file descriptor to change the owner and permissions of a file. EPSS 0.2, 44th percentile, is an inadequate permission model that fails to restrict file stats through the fs. LStat API, allowing malicious actors to retrieve stats from files they do not have explicit read access to. EPSS 0.1, 27th percentile, is a flaw in Node.js20's HTTP parser that allows improper termination of HTTP/1 headers using \r\n\rx instead of the required \r\n\n, enabling request smuggling to bypass proxy-based access controls and submit unauthorized requests. And 2 additional CVEs. See show notes for the full list. Sources: MSRC, 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 and 2 additional CVEs. See show notes for the full list. Other disclosed vulnerabilities, CVE 2026-46242, is an eventpal struct/struct file UAF. EPSS 0.0, first percentile, is a heap buffer overflow in libsolve repopage store via unchecked decompression of malicious solve page data. EPSS 0.1, 20th percentile, affects I/O, compress versions before 220 for Perl, allowing arbitrary code execution in file glob mapper via an attacker-controlled output glob. EPSS 0.0, 5th percentile, is command injection via partial Git modules override in JIC submodule Gitoxide. EPSS 0.0, 0th percentile, is a buffer overrun in OpenSC 0.27.0 in do-key value via profile C. EPSS 0.0, 0th percentile, is a stack buffer overflow in OpenSC 0.27.0 or C1 via PIV process history in card PIV C. EPSS 0.0, 2nd percentile, affects I/O, uncompress, unzip versions before 215 for Perl, propagating uncaught exception when parsing zip header with malformed DOS state. EPSS 0.0, 14th percentile, is unsanitized vhost names in RabbitMQ that allow for cross-site scripting in the management UI, and 7 additional CVEs. See show notes for the full list. Sources: MSRC, 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 and 7 additional CVEs. See show notes for the full list. Next section, General Security News. Microsoft Incident Response criticized Microsoft faced criticism from researchers this week after claiming that those who dump proof-of-concept exploits for vulnerabilities they have not responsibly disclosed are enabling criminal activity, and that Microsoft will track them and bring cases against them. The statement drew backlash from the security research community. Sources: data breaches, net. Next section, Trends and Context. 3 themes dominate today's threat landscape. First, authentication bypass and certificate validation flaws continue to provide low-complexity attack paths into enterprise networks. Second, privilege escalation vulnerabilities in foundational Linux components, CIF switch, and container platforms, KubeVirt, expose infrastructure that defenders assume to be hardened. Third, AI platform security is immature, with critical RCE flaws like Flowise's CVE 2026-40933 stemming from fundamental design assumptions that trust user-supplied configuration data. That concludes today's cyber threat brief. From Carolina Clear Tech. Stay patched, stay vigilant.